Carnegie Mellon's second greatest victory was about 90 years ago. The football team soundly defeated Notre Dame in a great tournament. And then about 10 years ago, we had the victory that was the real deal, in part because that's one that changed the world. It had all the great elements of technology, enterprise, and a good share of adventures. I was giving a talk last year to an important audience. And just before I went to the podium, I was reading the key headlines of the day, and the national headline that day was autonomous car engineer is departing Google. And I'm talking to people who change jobs 10 times in their lifetime, and I just don't remember it being national news. Chat after that, talking about, well, what's next, and that day it was, well, I don't know, got no idea. And of course you can see from the last line there that he's now a business guy who wears pinstripe suits. Anyway, somebody so dear to us and to me, one of Carnegie Mellon's truly favorite songs, Chris.
First, thank you all for being here. It is a tremendous privilege to get a chance to come back here and talk at Carnegie Mellon. It's a place that is incredibly dear to my heart. I really want to say, though, thank you to Red for a couple things. So, Red's a lot of things. Marine, an educator, a professor. But I think for me, he's one of the people who taught me two of the most important lessons in life. One of them was to go out and do hard things. Even if you don't, if you can, and try for that. And that's really driven, my career and some of the teams that I've had the chance to work with. And then the other big one was really to see people kind of as they can be, rather than as they are in the moment. And I think for me, having had the chance way back, 14 years ago, to have a kind of a central role in some of what we did with the Grand Challenges would never have happened with a different person. And somebody else would be, talking here today. So thank you, Red, and thank you all for being here. The other thing I wanted to do is apologize in advance. So you all applauded. When I left Google, I had to give back all my slides. And so you are the guinea pig audience for the new Chris Urmson slide deck. So I hope it goes okay. So sorry about that. So today I'm hopefully telling you a little bit about the history, at least my perception of the history of self-driving cars over the last decade and a half, and talk a little bit about some of the experiences I've had and some of the reasons that are driving what is a pretty exciting place to be for robotics right now. And this worked beforehand, I swear. There we go. So the first thing to remember is that while there's a lot of excitement right now in this industry, we've been working on self-driving cars for decades. And we've done even some of it here at Carnegie Mellon in the past. So, I love when I see headlines about NVIDIA using a neural network to drive on the highway, with a giant supercomputing GPU. When these guys were doing basically the same thing with basically the same technique 25 years ago on an amount of compute that would fit in your toaster today. So, everything comes in waves. The other is everything old is new again. So this is a video I happened to stumble across on YouTube. This is Chuck Thorpe.
Suppose I need to deliver an emergency supply of cold drinks to my friend Keith, who lives a half-mile away, but I'm too busy to drive over.
Videos got better.
It is equipped with all the standard drinks. Television cameras, rangefinder that measures 3D positions, computers to digitize and process the images, and computer-controlled steering and speed.
So Chuck just said like the 5 things I'd say to describe what a self-driving car is, right? And again, from 20-something years ago, nothing's really changed. We use cameras, lasers, radars, computers, and control systems to move these things along. So it feels really fortunate to be in a place where we've now been able to advance that technology to the point where we can do some truly exciting things on the road. Oh my. So for me, self-driving cars started in the Atacama Desert on a field expedition with Dave Wettergreen and Red, where we were taking this robot, Hyperion, out and looking for signs of life. And I got to play around with the software that tried to have it not bump into too many of the giant rocks that you see here. And we were out there and we had a team of engineers and scientists, and it would move at a top speed of about 15 centimeters a second. I think we might have peaked it at 25. I would say probably 16 hours of the day where I was trying to make it work. And then it would go and drive for a while, and that was very exciting. And then we'd spend another 16 hours trying to replicate that the next day. And it was really actually very exciting stuff. And we were doing some fundamental, yes I was, and other people were doing fundamental approaches to how do we look for signs of life on other planets. And Red came down to the desert to check in on us and said basically, Chris, we're doing this Darpa Grand Challenge thing. Do you want to take part? And I was pretty close to finishing my thesis, and I said, Red, I got to think about it. I got to talk to my wife. But the idea of having a robot drive at 50 miles per hour instead of 15 centimeters per second seemed pretty damn appealing. And so eventually said yes. And so we jumped into, at the time, what was this unthinkable mission to get a robot to drive across the desert about 150 miles from Los Angeles to Las Vegas and do that in less than 10 hours. And the Defense Department decided at the time that they wanted to try a novel way to fund this. They weren't going to actually pay us to do it, which was disappointing, but they were going to put $1 million check, giant $1 million, to the team that could actually make that happen. And so Red gathered a team, scraped together some funding. We cut the top off a Humvee, put some computing in it, and took it out to the Nevada desert and started testing. And we had about 6 months from when we said we were going to do it until when the event happened. And we tested it really hard. Faster is not always better. This event happened because we were trying to run our first 150-mile test. We were on this oval course, and we did the math, and we said at 30 miles per hour, 150 miles was going to take 5 hours, and at 50 miles per hour, 150 miles was going to take 3 hours. It was clear which of those was better. And so we set it on its way. And in a very dismal moment in my life, and I think for many others, the vehicle just made a little swerve, got a little bit outside the road, sunk on one side, and rolled over. This led to one of the more notable moments in my life where I got beeped on the History Channel describing what happened to the car. But fortunately, we got it put back together. This is the power of having a team like you all who are willing to do whatever it takes to meet the objective. And 10 days later, we went down to Southern California and took part in the qualification events for the Darpa Grand Challenge. And this is a little video that I'm just going to talk over here, maybe, of what that day looked like. It's back? Okay, I'm sorry. And now it's back again. And so what you're looking at, this is a little town called Barstow outside of Los Angeles. There are the robots that are getting ready to go that morning. In a few moments here, we should see Sandstorm, our vehicle, take off from the line. And we'll check this out. But this was the first time for any of us that we had to let this vehicle take off from the starting chute and not have any people anywhere near it. And I can remember, our hearts were kind of in our throats. Was it actually going to go? Gentleman waves the completely meaningless green flag. And then off it headed into the desert. And I don't know if any of you have children, but this felt very much like that moment where you let your son ride to school for the first day, or your daughter ride to school for the first day. Because we'd been with it day and night for the last 3 months, and now it's just off on its own, and hopefully it fends for itself. Long story short is they launched 15 robots that day off for this 150-mile quest. Most of them got to about there. Sandstorm headed off into the desert. And at about 7.5 miles into that 150-mile distance, after driving through, I think, 3 fence posts, it came to rest on the side of the road, high-centered on a berm, spinning its wheels, trying to get free because it knew it wasn't moving, and the only answer it had to that was to try harder. They ended up dragging it back with the half shafts broken, and that was the end of the day. We went the furthest at 7.5 miles. The team behind us went about 6.5 miles. They only did that because we drove through the fence posts for them. They had a much smaller vehicle, and if they'd been out first, it wouldn't have gone well for them. And so, we kind of hung our heads a little bit, but then when we thought about it, we'd actually done something pretty exciting. So first, we pioneered the use of high-definition maps to solve some of the challenges in mobile robot motion planning. That was kind of a big thing that is actually sticking to today. Just a couple of years ago, a bunch of German OEMs bought a mapping company for $3 billion to build maps for robot cars. And I think the genesis of this can be traced back to the technical approaches that fell out of the Darpa challenges. The other thing that happened is we drove 7.5 miles at 40 miles per hour across the desert. And that was about an order of magnitude more than anyone had done before. And so the Defense Department didn't listen to the press, which crucified everyone involved, and said, come back in a year and a half, we'll do it again, and let's see how it goes. And so we built another vehicle. I was going to give up on this clicker, I'm sorry. So we built a second vehicle, and we started practicing and developing. And it looked like this. This one we didn't cut the top off. We worked with some great partners, did a deep integration, got the vehicle driving really quite well. This time we actually had done a number of 150-mile trials before we showed up on race day, so we thought we had a real good shot. 10 days before the race, we did this. This was disappointing. But again, through kind of the miracle was the team, we were able to get the thing back together, put it on its wheels, send it out into the desert. And at the end of this race, actually we had 5 vehicles from the field that came back, and 2 of them were ours. And Highlander, which is the vehicle in the middle here, one of the kind of the untold stories of this is Highlander went out first, was very fast, and then at some point really kind of lost engine power. And that meant that it lost the main sensor because of the way we were drawing the power off the system. And so it struggled through the race and finished it without kind of the primary sensing modality that it was supposed to be using for driving. So it was really a pretty exciting engineering feat to have engaged that level of reliability into a system for an event like this. What I'm not saying is the team from Stanford won. Sorry. They got a $2 million check. We got a thank you, try again, which was, I think, a little disappointing, but that was what we signed up for. But this was a day where many of us in the field could kind of stand on our soapboxes and say, look, there's actually something here. We think something could come of this. There's a chance, and at the time, what we saw as the big application was helping save men and women in the armed forces and keeping them out of harm's way moving goods around. But I was talking with Red earlier today, and he was able to see this a little earlier than me, which was exciting. After that, the Defense Department said, okay, it's great. You can drive through the desert. You can not bump into too many things. What we really need, though, is vehicles that can actually move around through supply bases and get goods through cities. And so they came up with the concept of the urban challenge. And here, and again, the idea was drive 60 miles no remote control, no midget wrapped in aluminum foil hiding in it, but have the vehicle be able to drive on its side of the road, be able to have it deal with stop signs, and now deal with other moving traffic. So in the Grand Challenge, the world was static, and all you had to do was not hit the stuff that didn't move. In this one, you had to naturally interact with the other vehicles and be able to park. And so we built a team again, charged after this for 1.5 years, and at the end of the day, as many of you probably know, we ended up doing pretty well. We won that day. But what was even more exciting for the field was that it wasn't just one team finishing, but 6 teams finished that day. From here, from Stanford, Virginia Tech, Cornell, MIT, and UPenn. There we go. Didn't insult anyone. We had the first robot car crash that day, so that was exciting as well. But we were able to, for those of you keeping score, that was MIT and Cornell. So exciting times for them. But again, we were able to get on our soapbox after this and say, wow, we can actually, really do something with this. We can have vehicles move in traffic, and we can push the field forward. And at that point, Darpa, who is generally a very forward-looking agency, said, basically problem solved. Peace out. Go figure it out yourselves from here. And what had been this amazing community, this almost Woodstock-like group of people pushing the technology forward, kind of dissipated. And the energy was a little let out of the balloon. We built, at Carnegie Mellon, we built a center with General Motors. We did some exciting work with CAT that's now become a product. Stanford had a center with Volkswagen, but a lot of the energy dissipated. And then for me, was a big step, next step in my kind of career, was I got a phone call from the folks at Google, and they said, hey, we'd like to work on self-driving cars. And this was before Android and before Google is the behemoth it was today. My immediate response was, really? That doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? And fortunately, there were much more visionary people involved than me. And so why would Google want to do that? Well, fundamentally, Google believes that they have this immense engineering capability, and they should use it to solve important problems. From the very top, Larry and Sergey saw transportation as an important problem to solve. And the reason why is multifold. One of the primary ones you think about is safety. So in the US, we're up to about 40,000 people killed every year on our roads. Worldwide, 1.3 million people. That's an incredible number. And 95% of those, roughly, are due to human error. And not because people are bad drivers, but because in general, they just lose attention for a moment, and something awful happens. And with the rise of distracting devices, cell phones, iPads, whatever, in cars, this is just getting worse right now. So there's an incredible opportunity to do good. Next is traffic. The average American commutes something like 50 minutes a day, every day. And doesn't matter how much you love cars, this is not fun, right? You can have the nicest Porsche on the market, and you're still not going to enjoy it. And so giving that time back and thinking about how you can free that time to be more beneficially used for society or for the economy is a massive, massive trigger that we haven't tapped into yet. The other big thing to think about is how little you actually use your car. So it's the second biggest investment, maybe the third behind your education that you'll make in your life, and it sits idle 96% of the time. Think about that for a moment. You paid a bunch of money for something you use 4% of the time. So if we can bring autonomy to bear, we should more efficiently share and use these resources, and that means that's giving back kind of the regular person, that 96% of that expense, because they really shouldn't have to pay that premium to have access to a vehicle. And there's also a huge benefit to cities. So this is, I think, Houston. If you squint at this, you can see a massive amount of downtown Houston is dedicated to parking. In fact, the good folks at VW gave me this slide. And that's all parking. So imagine both the societal benefit of giving the city back to people, but also the economic benefit of taking that land that is now kind of urine-stained and not pleasant to be in, and turning it into space that you could use as parkland, or you could use as commercial space, residential space, what have you. The opportunity to kind of make cities livable again is really, truly profound. And then finally, the reason why Google was involved is because, these two guys, right, and their deep belief in kind of moving the ball forward and helping solve problems and going after things that matter and just having that vision. And so, it was, as we got through it and decided to go there, it was a pretty exciting time. And so when I came to Google, this is again way back 2009 now, we didn't really know whether you could actually make this commercial or not. So we set for ourselves two goals. One was to drive 100,000 miles on public roads, which was 10 times more than the Path Group had done before, which was kind of the largest number of miles accumulated in the US before that. And then the other was to drive 1,000 miles of interesting places. And the idea here was to kind of get a statistical sample, but then also make sure we weren't unreasonably biasing that sample to trivial places to go. Because as an engineer, the thing you do is cheat, right? I think if you haven't learned that, the job of an engineer is to cheat as much as you can. And so if you're going to drive 100,000 miles, the right answer is to go get on the freeway and do it at 65 miles an hour instead of driving through the city at 15. And so that's what we did. But we also drove really interesting places, like along the Pacific Coast Highway or crossing all the Bay Bridges. And going back to the theory of, if it's not hard, why are you really bothering? The company said, basically, you've got 2 years. If this works out and you're able to accomplish these objectives, then we'll figure out what to do from there. And if it doesn't, well, I guess it's probably not the right time. So, good luck. I don't know how serious they were about that, but it was certainly expressed that way. And so, we pulled a small team together, and we really charged hard at this for a couple of years. And by the end of 18 months, we were able to actually get the technology kind of out on the roads and accomplish those goals. And that was about the point where Google kind of announced that we were doing this work at all. We had fun with that. And then we started to think about, how do we actually turn this now to a product? We believe the technology can be productized. What should we do with it? And the answer there was, let's go make a system where you get on the freeway, you press a button, it drives for you, and then you can do whatever you want in the car until it gets to your exit. Then you press a button again and drive off. And we thought this could be a pretty interesting product because most of commuting sucks, as we established earlier. And if you could take that boring part of driving away, the world would be better. So we spent about 1.5 years, and we really hardened the capability of the vehicle. We got to the point where we were comfortable letting people that weren't our test engineers sit behind the wheel and go take it out into the world for a week or a day. And then we looked at how they used it, because as you move from technology to product, the human element of this really becomes profoundly important. Whether it be the societal acceptance of the technology or whether it be the individual user finding value in the capability. And so we gave this out to people. At first, they were just Google employees that weren't associated with a self-driving car. And we said to them, look, we know where you live. Take care of this. You're representing the company. Don't do anything really stupid. But tell us what you think. And we had people take it, and they came back and they said, basically, it was awesome. Right? We had somebody come in, and he was a Porsche driver, and he told us up front that this was going to suck and that he thought what we were doing with this, we were wasting our time. We figured we'd bring him into the fold just because it would be a counterpoint that would be useful. He had it for a week and came back and said, I get it. It turns out I'm a terrible driver. And worse than that, all those other people are terrible drivers. And so, at that point we were like, yeah, we've kind of got something here. But as we started to think about, how do we get this out to the world, and who is it going to have the most profound impact with, we realized that, basically, making a capability for rich people to kind of make their life a little more pleasant wasn't as important as actually serving transportation and helping everyone be able to move around. And so at that point, we decided to push into driving everywhere. And we we ended up saying, okay, let's not just work on the freeway, let's get the vehicle to actually drive through things like this intersection, which I used to bike through on my way to work every day. And so there's cyclists, there's crosswalks, there's trains, cross traffic, traffic lights. It's kind of a disaster. And it's probably, in made up hand wavy units, probably 2 orders of magnitude more difficult than getting a thing to drive on the freeway. But we took that on. And the other thing we took on at the same time was thinking about how is somebody going to actually use a vehicle where you don't have to drive it, where your goal is just to get where you're going and not kind of white knuckle the experience the whole time. And so we decided to actually build prototype vehicles to allow us to understand what that experience should look like. And so we built 50 of these, never with the intent to go to mass production. And we started to understand how people could use them. And a little before, about 9 months before I left Google, we got to the point of being able to do this.
In 2015, we completed the world's first truly driverless ride on public roads. Just a person in a car, no steering wheel, no pedals, navigating everyday traffic.
Well, I've never been in Austin, Texas. Now I'm driving in Austin, Texas. It's a profound experience for me to be alone in a car. A very important segment of my life was cut away when my vision failed. And a self-driving car would give me a huge part of my life back.
I think it goes on from there. But I didn't want to make too much of a Google commercial today. I figured I was doing a fair bit of that already. For me, this is really the heart of what you try to do with a technology and what robotics can mean. For Steve, he's blind, if you didn't pick that up. He's incredibly limited in his ability to get around. He's dependent on, mostly malfunctioning public transit and friends. And so for him to be able to use a technology, even in a very prototypey kind of one-off way, just changes his world. And the technology really disappears into the background, right? It's not really about the fact that we have this magical bit of engineering going on that's driving a car around. It's about the fact that somebody can get where they're going, and that the rest of it just works. And so that's what we really aspire to, I think, in the field and where we're pushing to. So I've told you a fairly rosy story, despite a couple of upside-down Humvees. I wanted to share with you a little bit about my thoughts about some of the bumps and bruises that have come along the way. The typical, at least for us for a while, as Google, we had the largest test fleet out on the road. We were, at this point, Google's done over 2 million miles of testing, and we've had a bunch of fender benders. I don't know what the numbers are anymore, but when I left, it was somewhere in the mid-20s of accidents the car had been in. And almost invariably, the accidents looked like this, where it's car, self-driving car, does something very reasonable, comes to a stop, some human crashes into them. We had variations on it, where the human would come to a stop and then forget they were holding the brake pedal and roll into them. We had situations where we were doing, 30 miles an hour, come to a stop, 2 cars in front of us come to a stop, we do it nice and gracefully, guy behind us doesn't notice we're all coming to a stop, smashes into the back. And so one of the things that we learned through this, and this is kind of what those accidents look like. This is the highest speed one I think they had. We come to a stop, this guy just doesn't even hit the brakes. And so there was a couple of interesting things that came out of this. One, there's a lot more chaos on the roads than most people think about, right? The number that is easy to measure is fatalities. And it turns out we kill someone on America's road about 1.15 times per 100 million miles traveled, give or take. Accidents like this, there are literally no statistics for, other than those that are gathered in some of the large test fleets that are out there. Because the next best statistics you hear are police-reported accidents, which are something like 1 per 150,000 miles. Turns out none of those 20-something accidents that I talked about actually rose to the level of being police-reported, even this one. And so the accident rate is really somewhere between 2 to 10 times what we've been able to measure based on police reported accidents. So there's a lot of carnage out there that, while it doesn't lead to fatalities, leads to a lot of property damage and loss that can be cleaned up relatively easily. Now, obviously, at Google, not all of the accidents were due to people making goofy mistakes. Many of the accidents actually are due to kind of human factors type challenges. So this is a video taken from a Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority bus. Here's the bus driving along. Google self-driving car goes schmonk. And the bus it's hard to see, but the bus basically clips the mirror of the self-driving car. And while I was at Google, this was basically the only accident where we really determined that the self-driving car was kind of at least partially responsible for the event that occurred. And what happened here was one of what led to this is one of the fundamental challenges in making self-driving cars, and that is interpreting the intent of the other drivers on the road. So the self-driving car, and by the way, I can't talk about anything confidential at Google anymore. This is all stuff I've said publicly before, so I apologize if you've heard it. But what happened here is the self-driving car was on the side of the road. It saw some sandbags. It said, I can't go any farther down this edge of the lane. It looked back and it saw the bus, and it said, okay, we're in the same lane. By law, he's supposed to slow down and let me in. And by the way, I don't think he can fit past me if he doesn't slow down. And so that means he's going to slow down, and so I can go, right? And I mean that like not in that if I move forward he can't fit past me. The cars thought, as I stand right now on the road, that bus will hit me, therefore it must slow down, therefore I should move out of its way. The bus driver looked at the situation and said, I can make it. And he was right. If the car hadn't moved forward, he probably would have made it past. At the same time, technically he probably should have, he was like you or I driving like that, you would have gone, ee. So, this is this fundamental challenge of what is the other person on the road going to do? How do I respond to them? And predicting that and building that is really one of the places where we talk a lot about the opportunities with deep learning and machine learning. Building those models and building those in a regional way is going to be one of the real opportunities for that technology in this space. So there's other accidents that have happened, and this really, again, kind of hammers home that or vehicle-human fallacy of and issues of understanding. So this is one of the Uber vehicles that came to a rest on its side during testing in Phoenix. And I have no first-hand knowledge of this. I'm just kind of piecing together what happened from what I've read in the press and what I've seen in the reports here. But my understanding of what happened is that there was a bunch of stopped traffic. The self-driving vehicle was in the leftmost lane, 2 lanes of stopped traffic. Self-driving car says, hey, my lane in front of me is clear. Rock on, keep going. A person was trying to make a turn across traffic, across those 2 stopped lanes. They start to kind of ease out in front. They kind of can't really see the road as much, and given there's all this stopped traffic, they had the expectation that whatever was going to be driving down that lane would do so at a slower speed and so could react. They pull out, and you end up with sideways parked car. And so again, understanding the expectations of the other drivers and being able to match that and kind of solve that impedance gap is really the heart of the problem going forward. The last one here of kind of the significant accidents you've heard of is a Tesla Model S. This is the fatality that happened in Florida. And again, don't have any first-hand knowledge of this, but have tried to piece together from what I understand of the technical approach they've taken and the police reports. But the driver in this vehicle was bombing along on the freeway. He'd been using autopilot for a bunch of time, and it always seemed to work. And so he kind of got to a point where he just trusted it. Despite Tesla saying, don't trust it. Despite Tesla saying, you have to have your hands on the wheel and your eyes out the front. He said, no, I've driven 10,000 miles. with autopilot, it just works. And so for whatever reason that day, he was less attentive than he should have been. A big truck pulled out across the road in front of him. Autopilot didn't see it and went right under the truck and did this to the car. And this is truly a tragic outcome. But it fundamentally goes down to a question of trust and understanding between the human and the vehicle. The vehicle and the software in the vehicle was expecting that the driver was paying attention and would safety check it for situations that it wasn't aware of. And the driver, because he had 10,000 miles of experience, said, I don't need to, it works well enough. And this is one of the fundamental limitations of kind of human attentiveness and all the model where people will monitor a system for long durations and call that the safety approach. Seems like it's fundamentally challenged. And Tesla, in response to this, to their credit, made a number of steps to solve that misunderstanding and make sure that at least the vehicle understood that the driver was paying attention. This leads to, one of the kind of schisms, I think, in the automated vehicle space of, and there's kind of underpinnings of that. One is kind of the Tesla approach or the tier one automotive approach, which is let's just keep making incrementally better driver assistance systems, and one day we'll turn around and we'll have a self-driving car. And then the other approach, which at Google we pushed on, was no, actually, these are two distinct technologies. One is driver assistance, and the market pressures and capabilities will push in one direction. And the other is a fully self-driving vehicle where we can actually afford and need to apply different technologies to actually get to a level of responsibility where you can turn your back and trust it. And this is one of the big open debates in the space. My belief is fundamentally in the Google camp that there is a discrete step in the basically the design space when you have to be able to turn your back and trust that the car isn't going to have somebody there to take control. And it really comes down to, do you care about recall or precision or both? And in one case you care about both, and in the other you really only care about precision, right? In a driver assistance system, most of the time it's better to do nothing than to do something. And only when you're really, really, really sure that you're going to prevent a bad event, that's when you should trigger. And that will guide you down a selection of technologies that will limit your ability to bridge over to the other side. The other big thing that gets talked about is the trolley car problem, right? And what happens about, what are the ethics, what are the morals that you have to bring to bear on self-driving cars? And I think I figure I'm going to get this question at the end, so I try and answer it now. And my answer is you have to think about this very pragmatically. Because we can end up in a place where you have the perfect be the enemy of the great even. And so the premise of the question is, self-driving cars on the road, and it has two choices. It can drive through a flock of cyclists or crash into the wall and potentially hurt or kill the occupant. What should it do? And I think the answer to this is first, it should never be in that situation, right? If you got there, you done screwed up, right? The vehicle should be a self-driving car, should be a conservative, safety-first driver, and it should be able to predict these behaviors because it turns out if you're paying attention, they don't just surprise and pop out at you. So let's avoid them in the first place. And then the second is, let's just be explicit about it. Right? I think you can solve this by telling the user, telling the consumer, this is what you should expect. This self-driving car, if you choose to ride in it, will prefer to avoid pedestrians and will put you at risk to save a pedestrian. And then as a consumer, you can say, hell no, I'm not going to ride in one of those. Or you can say, you know what, that actually aligns with my moral judgment of the world, and I'll be okay with it. And the outcome is actually going to be much better than leaving that at the hands of the person behind the wheel, because a person doesn't make moral judgments in the moment. We know that the cognitive time doesn't, there isn't enough time for that to elapse. And so they're just going to make some instinctual movement, and maybe they're going to be happy with it, maybe they're not, but it's not going to be what they expect it to be necessarily. So I think this is basically an interesting philosophical conversation, much as it has been for the last, 200 years, but it really shouldn't be driving whether we bring the technology to market or not. So it's a little crazy in self-driving car land right now. And I figured I'd take a moment to try and give my thoughts about why this is happening. Now the first is, this is a relatively recent thing. Oh well.
Cars that park themselves.
Sorry about that.
Pretend company. We've seen that movie. It ends with robots harvesting our bodies for energy. This is the all-new 2011 Dodge Charger, leader of the human resistance.
That is, I think bar none, that is my favorite ad of all time. So this came out after Google announced that we were doing self-driving cars. And I apologize to anyone who was sleeping, because that was not fun. We went out after we announced we were doing this. I went around and talked to car companies. I talked to tier 1 suppliers, and I literally got laughed at. That, no, why are you doing this? It's a waste of time. What are you thinking? How could you possibly be so reckless as to test this stuff? It's never going to happen. This was a Super Bowl commercial, by the way. So I can tell you, you feel like you made it when somebody mocks your work in a Super Bowl ad. Like that's expensive. So a lot has changed over the last 5 or 6 years. And let me give you a little bit of insight of kind of what's going on in the automotive industry right now. So there's 3 big trends that are disrupting, I hate that word, but impacting the automotive world. So one is a shift from internal combustion to electric. And part of this is because people are looking at Tesla saying, that is a sexy car. If they can get to volume, we're screwed. And part of it is because of environmental standards putting pressure from the other direction. And that the expectations, assuming our current president doesn't revisit the matter, for the improved environmental performance of vehicles is going up quite dramatically. And it's not obvious that we can actually achieve those levels of performance in an economically viable way with a combustion engine vehicle. So there's a bunch of pressure on electrification. There's a bunch of pressure coming from connected vehicles and the impact that has in creating things like Uber and Lyft and Didi. And this kind of fear of disintermediation where somebody else is going to own the customer and they're just going to have to sell cars to that person. And then they're going to, that company, whether it be Uber or Lyft or Didi or whoever else, is going to basically have all the economic power. And then the third is automation, which when you combine it with electrification hides a bunch of the problems with battery charging. And when you combine it with transportation services, eliminates a lot of the cost and the friction and makes them even more accessible than they are today. And so that's all the kind of the positive pressure reasons to run there. And then on the other side, we've had a series of scathingly bad things in the press. So the one I happen to pick on, I don't mean any offense to Volkswagen, but is the Dieselgate event. And this has shaken the industry fairly to its core, particularly Volkswagen, where they said, holy crap, we can't behave the way we have done, we need to change. And so that's created some energy into the system that's allowing new things to happen. The other reason is there's a lot of money involved. So this is just for the US. So imagine, well, don't imagine, it turns out in the US there's like 3.2 trillion miles driven every year. Imagine if you can bring technology to bear, reduce the cost of those miles, and make, say, a dime per mile across the ecosystem that's providing the capabilities to make self-driving cars. That turns out that's $300 million of revenue per year. Sorry, billion, geez, thank you. That's a bigger number. 300 million, this would be a really weird set of investments. But sorry about that. Thank you for that. I was really just testing if you're awake. So $300 billion, that's more revenue than Apple, right? That's 50% more revenue than Apple. And that's just a staggering amount of money. And then all of the other opportunities that will follow from this are pretty profound as well. And so this is part of what's causing that land rush. The other thing that's going on is this shift to transportation services. So this is Uber, Didi, and Lyft. They have $110 billion of market cap that's been created basically in the last 4 years. This is GM, Ford, and FCA. They have about $110 billion of market cap that's been created over the last 100 years. One of them is probably going to double over the next 4 years. And so if you're an automotive company, you're saying, it would be really nice if that was us. But you're not really expecting it unless you start to do something different. So when's it all going to happen? This is a question that comes along a lot. And I'll give you my take now, again, because I assume I'll get the question. I think you're going to see self-driving cars that people can use in communities within the next 5 years. I don't think you'll get them everywhere. You're certainly not going to get them in incredibly challenging weather or incredibly challenging cultural regions. But you're going to see neighborhoods, communities where you'll be able to call a car, get in it, it'll take you where you want to go. And that'll happen in the next 5 years. And then over the next 20 years, you'll probably see a large portion of our transportation infrastructure move to automation, is my expectation. And it's going to happen relatively quickly. And this is both exciting and terrifying. And so that brings us to here. And what I really wanted to hopefully leave you with today was a sense that, one, there's some really exciting things happening in this space. But also, for roboticists, this is a pretty damn good time to be alive, right? We're seeing some really fundamental transformations that we haven't really seen in a century. To the structure of labor, the structure of transportation, and to be a part of that and have a chance to take it, to be involved in it is pretty exciting. And I hope that many of you are sharing that excitement and enthusiasm for what we can kind of do going forward. So thank you very much. I think that was all I had. Happy to take any questions. Please.
Why did you move on from Google? I don't mean that facetiously, I mean that.
No, it was a very, very difficult decision for me. So my 7.5 years at Google were probably the best 7.5 years of my career, my life. For me, professionally, to have the resources, to build a team, be part of that group of people, to help shift an industry. I don't really believe that this pivot would have happened without Google's investment in pushing it forward. And spend that time with more people was fantastic. But just at some point, it kind of runs its course. And I didn't know what I was going to do next. But I kind of it was time to go find something new. And when I left Google, I legitimately didn't know, whether I was just going to go hang out on a beach or, I really didn't have a plan. And then over the course of a few months, I started to think about, hey, there's maybe some space to do something exciting beside Google in this space. And then I started to talk to a couple of people. So you may know, so we have this company called Aurora. I tried not to shill for it, but I'm about to. So if you're interested and you're good at what you do, we'd love to have you. If you're interested and you're not good at what we do, we don't really want you. But, come the end of last year, I started to talk to Sterling Anderson, who used to lead Autopilot at Tesla and helped launch Model X, and Drew Bagnell. And around December, we said, hey, this would make sense to go and build a company in this space. And so we founded Aurora, and we've been running since.
So like you said, it's a very exciting market. It's starting to heat up. Last year, we've seen a dramatic increase in all these startups. So it's kind of a blunt question, but if you don't mind, what sets Aurora apart from the mass competition that's starting to appear?
Did you work at Argo?
I may or may not work at Argo.
Well, I can tell you, we're definitely better than those Argo guys. Whatever you do, don't take a job there. That's a terrible place. So I think part of what we're banking on is the fact that we have some experienced people who know what they're doing and can help guide the team and understand where the technology is going to be. So, I think it's awesome, right? The fact that there are dozens of companies in this space, 5 years ago there was no companies in self-driving cars, and now there's literally dozens, and there's billions of dollars of investment. And so to see that kind of rising tide and to have the opportunity to be part of that, it increases the odds that one of us gets there and we get these societal wins. Why Aurora? So we have a set of great co-founders who really deeply understand the space, who've shipped product, who understand machine learning in a way that few do. And in my case, well, you're stuck with me. And we have some good ideas about how to take the most recent kind of results that are coming out of academia and apply that to the problem in what we think will be ways that allow us to move quickly.
Thank you.
Kind of a non-answer, I'm sorry. Okay. Maybe somebody at the back?
So when you talked about the car flipping the mirror of the Google car, that particular accident, you talked about sort of the sequence of decisions that the car made when choosing to take that action. So how important is interoperability when it comes to self-driving cars? Because you just take like a deep learning model and you map images to steering angles, you don't really get that.
Yeah.
That capability.
Yeah, I do not believe in end-to-end deep learning as a solution for this anytime in the near term. For exactly that reason, that if we're going to have people's lives on the line, I need to be able to understand and segment this and be able to kind of regression test it and kind of get a sense for what's going on. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't really important ways that you should be applying deep learning and other flavors of machine learning and what have you, but I don't believe camera in, brake actuation and steering and throttle out. Yeah. At the very back.
So there's a huge investment going into self-driving cars right now. And I'm wondering, what do you think some of the interesting layoffs and other robotics like this, like LiDAR?
Yeah. So I think there are a few things. So one, cheap LiDAR. I think there's going to be, so in the same way that kind of the Kinect pushed forward indoor robotics, having a relatively inexpensive depth sensor, I think you're going to see, we have some of that with the Velodyne except for the inexpensive part, but you're going to see a lot of interesting sensors come to market. I think a lot of the techniques and the way we're applying them are pretty interesting and will over time bleed out. The fact that these are happening in commercial institutions rather than academic means the flow of information is going to be a little more slow. But I think we're going to build this core of people who understand how to build robust, real-world machines, and over time that'll kind of spread into the field.
Kind of going off that note, so as the guy back there said, there's been a major capital investment recently in cars, and
yeah.
As you said, the whole technology side has kind of just come to bear in recent times, where we've got a set of tools and a set of technology that's kind of minimum spec. We've gotten some legal support that's been helpful to get the cars on the road. But in terms of bridging between whatever level you want to call where we're at now, between 4 and 5, there's a number of technical problems that with innovation, yada. But notwithstanding, there's also the large human gap between expectations and human behaviors. What, if anything, do you think will cause a failure to reach level 5 or a plateau at which will stop, all cars being interconnected or anything, whether it's legal or financial or just, some dip?
So I guess I'm somewhat of an optimist. I don't see this not happening at this point, right? I think there's enough activation energy that unless something truly catastrophic happens, we're going to be able to make that leap. And really, if you can achieve, so for those of you who aren't familiar, so I think you're talking about the SE levels, 1 through 5. Level 4 is basically you can drive anywhere within a subset of places, and level 5 is you can drive anywhere. And actually, my model is you don't really care about level 5 because, I don't. If my car can drive through the whole city, I'm pretty happy. I don't need it to also go drive, off-road to Nevada or, on all highways. So I don't think there's a huge distinction there. I think the bigger gap is between driver assistance and, hands off, eyes off, feet off kind of actuation. And again, I just think there's so much energy that we're going to, we kind of have to make it there at this point. And we're actually really quite close. Please.
long term, if we're looking at the proliferation of autonomous cars to the point of exclusivity, is there any then real long-term value in predicting human drivers, predicting their actions?
Oh, it would be totally, like if, I've said this on several occasions, like if we can go get a city or a region that says, we're just going to take all the human-driven cars off the road, my life gets so much better. You know, and the big reason is that the delta V gap, right? So when you have two cars moving at each other, you know, the closing speed can be 150 miles per hour. When you deal with just pedestrians or cyclists, the delta V is more, you know, peaks at about 40 or 75 on freeways with stop traffic, right? And so if you can do that, the prediction problem or the forecasting problem becomes much easier, and you can go there. And I've thought about, you know, can you get enough cities that are willing to say, let's just take the cars off the road, put the self-driving cars in and go. If we can make that happen, that's great. I think that's a bigger lift than actually getting, you know, to do that broadly, than getting the cars to work with people.
I'm curious to know, how do you plan to handle the long tail events? Right?
Yeah.
What is your approach? I know experience gets in, but maybe
Yeah.
you can elaborate.
Yeah, so and this is something that we don't have complete closure on, so we talk a lot about long tail events, but almost all of them really boil down to don't hit it, right? Right. So if you can find the right representations, you can kind of compress it down to something that isn't that, you know, the tail is actually pretty heavy, and so I kind of believe that this is not as big a problem as is mostly perceived to be, because again, like fundamentally, it's don't hit that thing. It's not like you have to have all kinds of crazy behaviors to deal with these situations. Sorry.
In the last 50 years, automation has slowly been replacing more and more human labor. But with self-driving vehicles, it has the opportunity to do that at a much faster rate and much larger scale than ever before. I mean, when you look at it, more than half the states in the United States, the number one job is truckers, delivery drivers, tractors, other things in that type of industry. What, if anything, should or even can be done to help mitigate the economic challenges?
Yeah, no, this is one of the things that kind of I have a hard time sleeping sometimes thinking about some of these challenges, right? And this is not novel to self-driving cars. As you point out, it happened in the Industrial Revolution, happened in automation over the last 50 years. It happened through globalization. And as a society, we just haven't really done an awesome job of anticipating these things and building the retraining programs into place. I think with automated vehicles, there's some pathways where you can introduce the technologies that are actually less disruptive. And let's just take for a moment, you know, you quote the statistic that's often used around, you know, what large fraction are kind of, they're actually driving jobs, right? It turns out a driving job often encompasses more than driving. So it's the guy delivering the groceries to the restaurant in the morning. And so I think that there is going to be, for many of these jobs, there's a role to be played for a person in kind of symbiosis with an automated vehicle. But, you know, there is no simple answer to this question, right? The argument is, I think, over the long term, that this kind of automation increases the economic efficiency. It allows people to have a much easier job moving to and from work, right? So when you think about someone that's in a relatively low-paying job, has to take 2 or 3 bus rides to get to work. Instead, with an automated vehicle, they can get back 2 or 3 hours of their day. You know, hopefully that economic benefit nets out that as a society we do better. But it is a challenge.
So long-haul trucking seems right. You don't care about the last mile. You're happy to pay a human being to do the last mile if you can get 500 miles autonomously. So why don't we have that already? Why isn't it like, you know, already done thing?
V squared, right? I think is at the heart of it. So when I think about avenues to attack the problem of getting self-driving vehicles onto the road, you have a trade-off to make. So one is, let's move around at relatively low speeds, but deal with the increased complexity of an urban environment. But the good news is, you make a mistake, almost certainly everybody walks away. Worse, someone's hurt. Trucking, you're moving at 75 miles per hour with, I don't know, tens of thousands of pounds of load behind you. Much simpler engineering problem. But when you make a mistake, it's a big fiery mess. And almost certainly, someone died. And so it really is a question of what is the right vector to introduce the technology in a way that will increase social acceptance of it. And I think it's, there's also complications around regulation with trucking. And so, it's from a pure engineering standpoint, totally agree. And we're actually starting to see early versions of this happening. A company called Peloton is doing really neat stuff with, right now, just convoying, but they're looking up the stack from there. But it's less about technology and more about how do you enter the marketplace. Please.
Do you have a take on if you're using a system that has like a machine learning or so you don't really understand the whole dynamics of it, how to deal with requirements, especially under a changing world that we can't always test everything?
Do you also work at Argo?
I do not.
Okay, I just wonder if this is like the Argo row here. So that is actually one of the fundamentally hard problems as well. Basically the building of the safety case that says, this is why I believe it's okay to have this on the road. You're not going to be able to follow some of the more limited conventional approaches to that, and you're going to have to start to bring in some statistical arguments and do a lot of interesting simulation work, yeah. But it really is one of the tough problems, requirements definition, and again, the safety analysis that flows from that. Please.
So when you left Google, I don't know if you can speak to this, but
yeah.
Or allowed to say, how do you feel about like how they're positioned right now about in the market with partnering? Do they need to partner?
Yeah, so maybe I'm not going to answer all of that, but what I can tell you is, from what I understand, they are several years ahead of everybody in terms of the technology. The challenge, of course, is the first challenge is getting one thing to work, and then the next challenge is getting mass scale adoption of the technology. And what is going to somewhat level the playing field is that opportunity to go to mass scale, because there's kind of this 4-year latency anytime you try and get a technology into the automotive space. And so if you kind of haven't kicked that off, there's a 4-year lag there. So, please.
I'd like to ask a question about something I'm sure you've thought about much longer than I have. A societal question. When I think to myself, why is it that lawyers are not going to prevent self-driving cars? I think, well, it's largely an insurance thing, and insurance companies would rather insure not quite perfect technology than drunken humans.
Yep.
What do you think is the most interesting or most important open legal issue that's going to have to get resolved along the way for widespread adoption?
That's a good question. So there's two parts that I would say. One is, don't let the regulation get ahead of the technology. That is just incredibly damaging. So I've actually really applaud the way NHTSA approached regulation with this round of guidance, right? It was guidance, which gives some flexibility. And then the second was, if you read it, it's not really prescriptive of the approach, unlike much of the FMVSS. It's more, these are the outcomes we want. And the problem with very prescriptive definitions of regulations is you get stuck in a particular technical approach, and if that doesn't pan out, you're screwed. So I think not letting the regulation land ahead of time. And then the other is resolving the challenge that stems from the fact that the states regulate the driver, and the federal government regulates the safety of the vehicle. And so if you have a vehicle that is also the driver, then you end up from a regulatory point of view in kind of the worst of both worlds, where you have two masters. And even worse than that, those two masters, it's like 51 masters, because each of the states is going to have their slightly different regulation. And so finding a way where you can kind of share or shift the responsibility of this to a central federal regime is probably important for us. Please.
When cars become commonplace, or self-driving cars become commonplace, will there be one technology that's under all of them, or will there be several companies that are contributing technology?
It's clearly going to be Aurora's technology. No, I think this is one of those things where we're going to end up with less than a handful of providers. I think the technology is complicated enough, and it's safety critical, and so at some point people are just going to say, okay, that's good enough. I can go get it from these guys. I don't need to own it myself, provided they have the right kind of economic structure in those relationships. In the same way that it's relatively widely understood how to make an aircraft, but there's really only a handful of global commercial aircraft manufacturers, because it's hard, even if it's well understood. And I think the same will play out with this, that at some point you've got technology that's proven, just those will be the ones that win. But there'll be demand in the marketplace for competition, so there'll be more than one provider. Please.
Do you think there's a point that capitalism sort of starts to break down as more and more jobs get automated and more people just sort of become unemployable?
Wow. That is a good question, and it's I'm just screwed on this one, I'm sorry. So I think this is actually probably going to be one of the defining challenges of the next 50, 75 years, right? Is as automation increases, as globalization increases, how do we balance the economic benefit of that? And again, this is way out of my skis. Please cut this from the video. I look at some of the rise of populism around the world, right? Again, so this is Chris Urmson making stuff up, right? But when you look at the rise of populism, a lot of that is stemming from globalization. And kind of the structures that have come along from that, and the kind of the redistribution of wealth that's happened there. And I think this has the opportunity to have that impact. And I think that's a challenge, and it's going to be one of our big challenges. But I think it would be not the right answer to say, let's not go after this thing that has huge life-saving benefits, has huge health and well-being benefits to people, has huge economic benefits as a nation. Because we're worried about that. We just have to recognize it's a problem and try and solve it as well. Chris.
If the Robotics Institute's product is students, you're one of our most important customers. How should we change how we produce students?
I think you were doing a really good job in 2005. Sorry. And you asked me this actually 5 years ago, and I felt like I gave a really crappy answer then, and I think I'm probably going to do the same here.
So I can tell you one thing.
Yeah.
I find it very frustrating when, for example, with Boston Dynamics in the area of humanoids, and with all the car companies, that the state-of-the-art technology is secret. I would like to be teaching the state-of-the-art technology, at least be able to find out what it is. So a natural response to that is to go teach them something really esoteric.
That's right. I should have thought, I knew you were going to ask this question. Because like I said, you asked it a year, I was going to apologize to you for giving a crappy answer last time and have one, and it never got to the top of the queue. What can I say? So let me start with something ingratiating, which is I actually think Carnegie Mellon does a really good job with this today. right? There's a reason why our team has got an awful lot of CMU people. I actually think the emphasis on practical implementation matters a lot. So that's okay. You're doing good. I don't know. So this is a slightly crappier answer than last time.
In many industries, such as the airplane building industry, their attitude is, we don't really care what you do with your students, because we're going to
retrain
our way
them.
when they get here.
Yeah.
Is that where robotics is headed?
Not yet, no. But it's certainly. So at Google, that was one of the things we kind of believed, right? Let's make sure we've got some really good raw material that has some experience, and we're going to bring them in and we're going to show them this is how we actually develop software. This is how we test this stuff and how we build these systems. I think you're worried about this more than you need to be. All right, because I actually think that there is a lot of carryovers through. I think the areas where the university kind of can't compete are on kind of volume of data and kind of financial resources applied, right? And that was one of the things that was exciting and scary at Google, was just like, so this is sort of, so I remember I had a graduate student here who was doing GPU-based motion planning, Matt McNaughton, and I remember he needed a GPU to do his research. And I had to find a way to find money in my Fraz account to buy him a GPU for his research. And when I got to Google, it was like, yeah, I'd like a GPU, right? And so the barrier to actually move forward on the technology is much lower, which to me was shocking, right? That it would be that much lower in industry than it was. And maybe that Google is a particularly unusual place. So I think that we, as a company, still leverage an awful lot of the work that happens in academia, and we take those basic principles and then we kind of supercharge them, right, by throwing more data at it, throwing more committed resources at it. But I don't think that, I don't think all is lost, and I think there's an incredible amount of value of the work that gets done here. So yeah, let me try and think, and maybe in 5 years I'll have a better answer. Sorry.
About sorry, the very best conversations are the ones that have to be cut off. So there's a point at which the real treat is to meet and mix personally with Chris, who will be with us for another 40-some minutes here. What a treat. What a wonderful life.
It's not done yet, I hope.